The dust swirled angrily along the desert road as the stagecoach rattled across the dry plains, its wheels cutting sharp grooves into the earth. Inside sat Emily Turner, her heart pounding in rhythm with the horse's hooves. She clutched her travel bag tightly, her fingers white against the worn leather dot. She was only a few miles from her new life in Silver Creek, a small frontier town that promised a fresh start far from the dangers she'd left behind. But out here, danger had a way of finding people. The sound of gunfire shattered the quiet afternoon. The stagecoach driver barely had time to scream before he was thrown from his seat. Horses reared and whinnied while the coach skidded sideways and slammed into a rock. Emily's head snapped back, her vision blurring as the door was torn open. A man in a filthy bandana and wide-brimmed hat reached inside and grabbed her arm. She kicked and screamed, but his grip was iron. "Got us a fine prize, boys," the outlaw shouted. Before she knew it, she was thrown onto a waiting horse, tied at the wrists, and surrounded by a gang of rough men with cold eyes and cruel smiles. They rode hard into the wilderness, leaving the broken coach behind like discarded trash. Back in Silver Creek, word spread fast. The stagecoach had been found, wrecked, driver dead, passenger missing. Sheriff Luke Hart stood in the center of the gathering crowd, his jaw tight as he listened to the grim report. "They took her, Sheriff," the deputy said. "Left no trail easy to follow." Luke narrowed his eyes beneath his weathered hat. "Then we'll make our own trail." Luke Hart was no stranger to violence. Years ago, he'd lost his wife to outlaws who had taken everything. He'd become sheriff not for glory, but to stop men like the ones who had stolen Emily Turner. He mounted his horse, gripping the reins tightly. "Gather a small posse," he ordered. "But I'm riding ahead. Every second counts." As the sun began to set, painting the sky with streaks of crimson, Luke rode out alone toward the unforgiving wilderness where Emily's captors vanished. He knew the land better than most. It was harsh, full of canyons, cliffs, and hidden gulches, where desperate men hid like snakes. Miles away, as darkness fell over the outlaw camp, Emily sat near the fire, wrists bound. The leader, Clay Maddox, leaned close, his breath heavy with whiskey. "You're gonna fetch us a fine ransom, missy," he sneered, "and if no one pays, well, we'll find other ways to make use of you." Emily lifted her chin, defiant. Despite the fear gripping her chest, "They'll come for me. You won't get far." Maddox laughed, but behind his confidence was the nervous glance of a man who knew the law might already be on his trail. And it was, far from camp. Beneath the cold stars, Luke Hart studied the faint impressions left by horses in the dirt. Every broken twig, every disturbed bush told a story. He pressed forward, knowing that somewhere ahead, a young woman's life hung in the balance, and he would risk everything to bring her home. The rising sun painted the horizon in bands of orange and pink as Sheriff Luke Hart rode deeper into the unforgiving wilderness. Every muscle in his body tensed with focus, his eyes scanning the rough ground for any sign of the outlaw's passage. He could almost feel time slipping through his fingers. Every moment lost could mean more danger for the young woman. He saw it, a broken branch, faint hoof prints leading toward the rocky hills ahead. The outlaws had veered into the canyons, a place few dared to follow. Luke dismounted to examine the trail more closely. The tracks were fresh. "You're not far," he whispered under his breath, "and I'm coming for you." As he pressed on, high canyon walls closed in around him. The stillness of the place was unsettling. It was the kind of place where ambush happened, where desperate men waited in the shadows. His hand hovered near his revolver. He trusted his instincts. They'd kept him alive more times than he could count. Back at the outlaws' camp, Emily sat on the cold dirt, her wrists raw from the rough ropes that bound her. She could feel Maddox's eyes on her like a wolf circling its prey. The other gang members lounged around the fire, cleaning their guns, laughing in low, bitter tones, but Emily refused to break. She thought of her family, of the life she dreamed of building in Silver Creek. She couldn't afford to give in, not now. Maddox strolled over, crouching beside her. "Don't waste your breath hoping, girl," he sneered. "Ain't nobody comin', and if they do, they'll end up just as dead as your driver." Emily looked him square in the eye. "You don't know who you're dealing with." Her defiance sparked an angry twitch in Maddox's face. He slapped her hard across the cheek, sending her sprawling into the dirt. The others laughed, but a few glanced nervously at the canyon's edge, as if sensing something they couldn't see. "You've got fire," Maddox growled. "You'll learn to lose it soon enough." Luke Hart watched the camp from a rocky outcrop. Above, he counted 5 men, including Maddox, their leader. The woman sat near the fire, bruised but alive. Relief mixed with rage inside him. He could see the slap mark across her face even from this distance. He studied their positions carefully. He was outnumbered 5-1. Charging in blindly would be suicide. He needed to break their advantage. Luke crept back toward his horse and retrieved 2 sticks of dynamite from his saddlebag, a last resort he hoped he wouldn't need. His plan was simple: create chaos and then strike fast, quietly. He moved closer along the narrow ridge, placing 1 stick of dynamite near a cluster of rocks directly above the camp. He lit the fuse and scrambled back to cover. The explosion tore through the air like thunder, sending rocks and dust raining down. The outlaws leapt to their feet, shouting and drawing their guns. Luke didn't hesitate. He fired the first shot, striking one man square in the chest as he tried to grab his rifle. The second outlaw barely turned before Luke's next bullet found him. The remaining men scrambled for cover, firing wildly into the dust cloud. Maddox grabbed Emily roughly, pulling her to her feet and pressing his pistol to her temple. "Drop your gun, Sheriff," Maddox bellowed, his voice hoarse with panic, "or I'll kill her right here." Luke froze behind a boulder, heart pounding. He could see Emily's wide eyes staring back at him, silently pleading. The outlaw leader was desperate, dangerous. Luke knew one thing for certain: he couldn't hesitate now. The air was thick with dust, smoke, and tension. Sheriff Luke Hart's heart hammered as he peeked from behind the boulder, calculating his next move. Maddox's pistol pressed hard against Emily's temple. Her breathing was fast, but she stayed remarkably still, her eyes locked on Luke, trusting him. The outlaw's voice cracked with anger. "I said drop your gun, Sheriff." Luke's revolver weighed heavy in his hand. He could see the fear in Emily's eyes, but also something else. She was waiting, not panicking. She was giving him time. "You let her go, Maddox," Luke called, keeping his tone calm. "There's nowhere left for you to run. The others are dead or dying. You release her, and maybe you live long enough to face trial." Maddox let out a bitter laugh. "You think I care about no trial?" "No, Sheriff. This ends right here. Either you die, or she does." Luke's eyes narrowed. Maddox was desperate, a cornered man. That made him dangerous but sloppy. "You kill her, Maddox, and you're a dead man before your body hits the dirt," Luke said, inching ever so slightly to the side to get a better angle. The remaining outlaws, only 2 now, stood frozen, uncertain whether to run or keep firing. They weren't as loyal to Maddox as he thought. Emily could feel Maddox's grip trembling against her skin. She glanced sideways and noticed his focus shift just for a moment as one of his men began to back away. That was her chance. With a surge of courage, she stomped hard on Maddox's foot and twisted sharply, driving her elbow into his ribs. The sudden movement knocked his arm just enough for the gun to swing wide. A single gunshot rang out. The world seemed to pause. Luke had fired. Maddox staggered, dropping his revolver as his shoulder exploded in pain. Emily scrambled away, collapsing behind a nearby rock for cover. The outlaw leader screamed in rage and agony, clutching his bleeding shoulder. His pistol lay useless in the dirt. Luke emerged from cover, gun still raised. "It's over, Maddox. Don't make me fire again." The 2 remaining outlaws exchanged glances, saw their leader wounded and helpless, and dropped their weapons. Their courage died the moment Emily broke free. Maddox sank to his knees, breathing heavily, hatred burning in his eyes. "You think you've won, Sheriff?" he rasped. "There'll always be men like me." Luke stepped closer, his revolver steady. "Maybe, but not today." He kicked Maddox's weapon further away and turned his attention to Emily. "Are you hurt?" Emily shook her head, still shaking but unharmed. "No, her voice broke. "I thought he was going to kill me." Luke's voice softened. "He won't hurt you again." He holstered his revolver and carefully untied the rope still biting into her wrists. Emily winced but kept her composure. Tears welled in her eyes, not from pain but from relief. "You were brave," Luke said quietly. "You saved yourself." She wiped her face, trying to steady her voice. "I didn't want to die out here." "You won't," Luke promised. "You're going home." By the time they made their way back to town, word of the sheriff's rescue had already spread. Townsfolk gathered along the dusty main road as Luke rode in, Emily sitting behind him, holding on tightly. Deputies led the captured outlaws off in chains. Maddox's face was pale and defeated, his threats silenced at last. The people of Silver Creek cheered, but Luke's eyes stayed focused on Emily. She had survived something few could endure, and her strength humbled him. As they dismounted, Emily whispered, "Thank you, Sheriff." Luke shook his head gently. "You're the one who fought. I just gave you a fighting chance." The nightmare was over, but both of them knew that what came next mattered even more. The dusty streets of Silver Creek hummed with excitement as word spread of the rescue. Folks came out of their homes and stores, tipping their hats and nodding in respect to Sheriff Luke Hart. For once, the fearful whispers that usually haunted the town were replaced with something else, hope. But Luke's eyes stayed on Emily. She had barely spoken since they arrived, and though her body was safe, her mind still lingered in the canyon, trapped by the fear she'd endured. "Come on," Luke said gently. "You need some rest." He led her toward the sheriff's office, away from the noise and stares. Inside, the room was quiet except for the ticking of the old clock. Emily sat on a small wooden bench, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Luke poured a cup of water and handed it to her. "Drink." She took the cup, her hands trembling slightly as she sipped. "I didn't think I'd make it back." Luke sat across from her. "You're stronger than you think." She gave a weak smile, but her voice was heavy. "I was so scared out there. Every time I closed my eyes, I thought about what might happen. What Maddox might do." Luke's jaw tensed. He knew the kind of evil men like Maddox were capable of. He had seen it before too many times. "You did everything right," he said firmly. "You stayed alive. You kept fighting." Emily's eyes shimmered. "I was just lucky you found me." Luke leaned forward. "It wasn't luck. I wasn't going to let them take you." There was a long pause between them, a heavy silence filled with unspoken pain. Finally, Emily whispered, "You lost someone too, didn't you?" Luke blinked. The old wound surfaced instantly, raw even after all these years. "My wife," he said quietly. "Outlaws took her. Long time ago. That's why I became sheriff." Emily lowered her gaze. "I'm sorry, you don't need to be." Luke's voice softened. "That's why I fight, so no one else has to go through what I did." For a moment, they both sat quietly, connected by shared pain neither had chosen, yet both had survived. Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, the town gathered for an impromptu meeting outside the sheriff's office. Luke stepped out, standing before the crowd. Emily stood beside him, the bruises still visible on her face, but her chin lifted high. Sheriff Hart raised his voice. "The gang that's terrorized these parts is finished. Their leader, Clay Maddox, will stand trial. The others will face justice too. But this woman right here," he gestured to Emily, "she's the real reason we're standing here tonight." The crowd listened in respectful silence. She fought back when most would have given up. "She gave me the time I needed to reach her. And today, she stands free because of her courage." A murmur of approval rippled through the crowd. For the first time since her rescue, Emily allowed herself a small, genuine smile. A man stepped forward. A rancher who had stayed silent during Maddox's reign of terror. "Sheriff, if there's anything we can do for Miss Turner, you let us know." Another voice chimed in. "She can stay in my spare room for as long as she needs." Luke nodded, pride swelling in his chest. Silver Creek, once paralyzed by fear, was finally finding its backbone. Emily glanced up at him. "Thank you," she whispered again. He smiled. "You don't owe me anything. You owe yourself." As the stars appeared above them, Luke knew this was more than just one rescue. This was a turning point for Emily, for the town, and perhaps for himself. Weeks passed, but the memory of that harrowing day in the canyon remained fresh for both Emily and Sheriff Luke Hart. The trial of Clay Maddox drew people from miles around. The courtroom in Silver Creek was packed each day, townsfolk eager to witness justice they had once been too afraid to demand. Luke sat near the front, watching as Emily took the stand. She stood tall, wearing a modest blue dress one of the townswomen had sewn for her. Her bruises had faded, but the strength in her eyes had grown brighter. "The man you see before you," she said, her voice steady, "tore me from my stagecoach, threatened my life, and would have sold me off like property had Sheriff Hart not found me. He believed no one would come for me. But he was wrong." Her words carried through the hushed room. Maddox sat silently at the defendant's table, his hands shackled, his face twisted in cold bitterness. When the verdict was delivered guilty on all counts, the room erupted in applause. The sentence was swift, life in prison for Maddox and his remaining men. Finally, Silver Creek was free from the grip of terror that had ruled for too long. Outside the courthouse, the townsfolk gathered around Luke and Emily, offering handshakes, food, and warm words. The fear that once darkened their faces had been replaced by gratitude and pride. "You did it, Miss Turner," one elderly woman said kindly. "You gave us courage again." Emily smiled gently. "I only did what I had to." Sheriff Hart stepped beside her, tipping his hat toward the woman. And sometimes, doing what you have to is the bravest thing a person can do. In the days that followed, Emily surprised everyone by deciding to stay in Silver Creek. She refused to let fear chase her from the life she had dreamed of. With the town's support, she opened a small schoolhouse, teaching the children who had once only heard gunshots and whispers of outlaw threats. For many of them, it was the first time they learned to read, to write, to dream. Each morning, as the children filed into class, Emily stood proudly at the door, her smile brighter than the morning sun. The scars of her past hadn't disappeared, but she wore them like armor, a reminder that she had survived and grown stronger. Luke often visited the schoolhouse on his rounds. He'd lean against the doorway, watching the children laugh and play, watching Emily guide them with patience and care. In those moments, he saw a future for Silver Creek he never thought possible. "You've built something good here," Luke said one afternoon as they watched the children run outside. Emily looked up at him, her eyes warm. "Only because you gave me the chance." Luke shook his head. "You gave yourself that chance. I just cleared the path." For a moment, they stood quietly, the late afternoon sun casting golden light across the town. "You know," Emily said softly, "you don't have to carry your guilt anymore." Luke's breath caught. No one had ever said that to him. Not since the day he lost his wife. "I know," he whispered after a pause. "For the first time, I finally believe it." As time moved on, Sheriff Luke Hart continued to protect Silver Creek, but the darkness that once haunted him faded like a distant storm. And Emily, once a frightened prisoner, became a pillar of hope for the town, her resilience a light that touched everyone who knew her story. The day evil came for Emily Turner was the day Silver Creek found its courage, and neither she nor Sheriff Luke Hart would ever walk alone again.